Yeah. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I know the ambassador has several engagements this evening, so I want to keep us on schedule. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Adam Stolberg, and I'm on faculty at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, and I also co-direct the policy research arm at the school, which is the Center for International Strategy, Technology, and Policy. And it's my distinct pleasure today to work with the Pakistan Student Association here at Georgia Tech in bringing together this event. And I must say, this is a very inspiring event, largely because it's been student generated. And I'm really thrilled that the students really took the initiative, and I'm really here as window dressing for Faiza and Efsad, who really have taken the lead here. And which really shows you here in an engineering institution, there really is interest in the broader picture, especially when it comes to global issues that countries like Pakistan are right in the middle of. I also want to take a few minutes to acknowledge two main sponsors of this event. One is the Ray Davis Memorial Endowment, and this was named after General Ray Davis, who was Georgia Tech's Medal of Honor recipient for his valor on the battlefield during the Korean War. The other sponsor is the Stanton Foundation, who generously provided some of the funds for our refreshments here. So, as I mentioned, this is a very interesting time, especially not only here in the United States and domestically, but obviously our foreign policy is going under critical review. And one area where there has been a slight utterance of change in strategy has been in Southwest Asia, especially concerning relations with not only Afghanistan, but Pakistan. And so I'm very pleased today to be able to host our speaker, who is His Excellency Azaz Ahmed Chowdhury, who is currently the ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. And before we came here, the ambassador mentioned that he was a recovering engineer. He is now ensconced in the diplomatic corps. And he did get his degree in diplomacy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. That was sort of the cherry on the cake of a very illustrious academic career. But even more so is that he was just telling us that he's completed his 37th year in serving in the diplomatic corps, and both at the bilateral and multilateral levels in Pakistan's diplomatic relationship. And before his appointment here as ambassador to the United States, which I guess began in March of 2017, he served as Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, the spokesman for the Foreign Ministry. He also was a representative to the UN Disarmament Affairs Directorate, and he also oversaw relations or the peace process with India. So he's really been in the thick of everything with respect to Pakistan's foreign relations. He's previously served in ambassadors across Europe as well as the Middle East, Cairo, Doha, and Tehran. Very much involved in the European cooperation, or the Economic Cooperation Organization that's based in Tehran. So without further ado, I'd like to be able to invite our esteemed guest, His Excellency, to give a set of prepared remarks, but he has been very generous in welcoming Q&A and discussion afterwards, so I'll moderate that. So without further ado, let me turn it over.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to all of you, and thank you all for coming. And let me begin by expressing my great delight in being at the Georgia Tech, a name that I had come to learn a long time back. When I actually came to Tufts, I was just telling my colleagues in the other room that I had a cousin, and we both left Pakistan together for the United States. I went to Tufts and he came to Georgia Tech, so we would talk often. But I could never make it, and it's only after, one knows what, 30 years that I've been able to make it, and I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you also to Sam Nunn School, and thank you all, above all, for coming here. Let me share with you my own thoughts in a manner that will perhaps appeal you more. I'd like to place this relationship in a broader context. And I'd like to start with my understanding of where this world is headed. Where are we? It is my impression that the world is changing, has changed, and is changing rather rapidly. And I'll sort of approach it from 3 dimensions. Let's see it at strategic plane. I believe that the major power rivalry with rising China and resurgent Russia is growing. In fact, people have already started writing and talking about it. Last week I came across a book which I started reading and have read almost half of it. Was by Graham Allison. You guys know who he is? He was the head of the Belfer Center at Harvard, and he wrote that book, Destined for War. And he's invoking Thucydides' trap. You guys heard about that? Thucydides' trap? This term was coined in the Greek city-states when these city-states were rising and fighting with each other. This was a Greek general, 400 BC, and a historian, who was from Athens. And when Sparta, which was the dominant power, and when Athens was rising, it said that when a dominant power sees another power rise and challenge its authority, the war becomes inevitable. This is the Thucydides trap. So he invokes to see that if today China rises and the United States being the dominant power, are they destined for war according to this trap or not? So he then goes on to study about 500 years and identifies 16 such situations and finds that, or concludes that 12 of those ended in a war. And 4 that didn't, there were certain reasons why it did. So he goes on. He's not advocating that US and China will actually fight. But what he's saying is that this could happen if it is not handled well. So these are the kind of discussions already happening. Another book that I would like to refer you to, and very interesting book, I read that in full, which came about 8-9 months ago. In fact, no, it came late last year. Richard Haas's book, A World in Disarray. It also concludes the same, that the world is changing, world is in flux. So when the United States announced its Asia pivot in 2011, many people in Asia started perceiving it as a Cold War style containment of China policy. And then the Chinese responded by their own project, what is called OBOR, or One Belt, One Road initiative, which, as you know, touches about 67 countries. So if this rivalry picks up, are there enough security mechanisms to deal with it? UN Security Council is divided. Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is meeting as we speak, is still new. In East Asia, which is home to some of the recent conflicts, there is no regional security mechanism. NATO, under President Trump's policies, is still evolving. So the situation is uncertain at the global. We don't know exactly. Gone are the days for the unipolarity of the world. I remember I was in the Fletcher School in Tufts in 1989. You remember the year 1989?
I was born.
All right, you were born, but you can always read about it. We lived through it. Berlin Wall came down, and I remember in the Blakey Hall sitting for hours watching that wall coming down. People were euphoric. They thought that Cold War has ended, will be one global village, and actually it started that way, globalization. And we thought that, in fact, some people went ahead, and Francis Fukuyama wrote, end of history. You guys read that article, end of history? And of course, he was wrong. And there were many, many articles later on which said. So 28 years later, we see that the world remains mired in conflict and change and flux. Now let's look at it from the security dimension. Are we better off today? Well, bulk of the Middle East and North Africa remains unsettled. The evil forces of transnational terrorism with their ugly manifestations are still roaming large. I'm referring to Daesh and the likes. The provocative policies of a regime in North Korea has brought that whole region to the brink of war. And the sources of security threat have actually multiplied. It's no more, it's not just conventional imbalances or nuclear threats. It has gone on to cyber security or cyber threats or food insecurity or many others, or even climate change. So sources of security have also multiplied, and we are not sure that we are ready to deal with them. Now let's see the third dimension. So I looked at it from strategic plane, I looked at it from security domain, and let me go to the third one, which is socio-economic scene. Europe, which went into that economic stagnation in 2008 after the financial crisis, is still recovering. Of course, northern states are better than the southern states, but it's still by and large very slow growth rates. Migration pressures have for the first time projected immigration or immigrants as economic or security threats. Happening in Europe, but it's also now beginning to happen in the United States. Climate change, a very real danger for the world, including especially my country, and I'll talk about it if it is required, which is very, very vulnerable to climate change. International trade. I think the world worked for decades to dismantle those barriers. And we see a resurgence of protectionist tendencies, wasting decades of work on that. So I see, even on socio-economic plane, a world which is changing very fast. Be it migration pressures, be it intellectual, be it climate change, be it whatever. Whatever we had gained in terms of consensus, a global consensus, through a series of mega conferences that United Nations convened during the 90s, that is now at stake, at risk. Let me take you to my region, which is South Asia, and where are we? The situation is not much different there either. India and China have an uneasy relationship or uneasy peace. India and Pakistan are not talking. Afghanistan remains awfully unstable. And Iran next door to us on the west, the nuclear deal which was arrived at after 10 years of work is under serious threat. So the situation is as fluid and uncertain in South Asia as it is at the global level. So how has my country, Pakistan, done in these uncertain times, in an uncertain world and an uncertain region? I think we're not done bad in certain ways, but we need to do a lot in many others. Let me count a couple of them. The biggest threat that we faced in the last 2 decades, particularly after 9/11, was terrorism. But it just didn't germinate in Pakistan just like that. It goes back to good about 38, 40 years ago, when Soviet Union decided to invade Afghanistan, and this whole concept of Afghan jihad emerged, where Pakistan, United States, and some others worked together. And when the Soviets left Afghanistan, many of these militants, the so-called jihadi elements, stayed back. And after 9/11, when Tora Bora was bombed heavily, most of them moved across the mountains towards the border mountains of Pakistan. And since Pakistan decided to join international coalition in the fight against terrorism, we became a legitimate target for them. And they started bombing our cities, installations, facilities, and even schools and mosques and what have you. And they were able to do so because in the tribal areas, which were historically, those of you who are history buffs would know that the tribal areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan was a land deliberately kept by the 19th century Russian Empire and British India as a sort of buffer zone. So they did not have a settled governance. So when the militants, especially Al-Qaeda and Taliban, came to that area, they took advantage of the political vacuum there. The area was being run by the Maliks, the local chieftains. They knocked them out and they dug themselves in. And their narrative was a flawed narrative, but a powerful one for that region. They said that, look, we expelled the Soviets. They called them infidels at that time. And this time around, we will expel the Americans from Afghanistan. It's a holy duty, jihad, so support us. This was the narrative they had spread. It was a flawed narrative. It was a flawed narrative because there is nothing holy in shedding blood on the marketplaces, on the streets, in the schools, and in the mosques. But somebody had to expose that. That happened a couple of years ago in Pakistan, where people said enough is enough. And all the political parties got together and they built a consensus that we will not accept terrorism or violence under any pretext and in any name. That's when our forces moved into the tribal areas, and 2-3 years down the line today, we are very proud that we have secured the entire area. The area which for centuries did not see governance is today a secure area. We think that history has been made in that sense. People of that area has gone back, so that vacuum is no longer there, which militants exploited. Now they are on the run. Some of them have gone back to Afghanistan, the others have gone into our urban centers, and we are sweeping them out there. And this improved law and order, of course, improved the economic situation. But I also know that for all these gains will be at risk and will remain tentative if Afghanistan next door does not stabilize. And that's where your country and my country come together as the top priority item of the relationship. Pakistan wants to see Afghanistan stabilized because we have suffered from the instability in Afghanistan. And we have seen that whenever Afghanistan is unstable, the instability invariably permeates towards Pakistan because of porous borders. It's a 2,000 miles porous border, open border. And therefore, we have seen that the instability comes in. So when the Soviets had actually come into Afghanistan, 5 million refugees crossed border and settled in Pakistan, 3 million of whom are still living in Pakistan. 38 years, 3 million. And along came Kalashnikov culture. We didn't know what Kalashnikov was. And along came drug culture, and the criminal mafias, and the smugglers, and what have you. So we have reached a conclusion that we need a stable Afghanistan because the instability flows towards Pakistan and causes problems for us. And we are convinced that the United States also wants to stabilize Afghanistan. Why? I think the United States has already suffered in many ways by this long 16-year war. According to estimates, US estimates, $680 billion have been spent. Thousands of lives have been lost. And you cannot have an open-ended war. So the United States has every interest to stabilize Afghanistan so that before it leaves, it is a stable country which does not allow safe havens for any militants who in turn, like what happened just before 9/11, would threaten the world peace and security. So we think that it's important for the two countries, Pakistan and the United States, to work together. In fact, as I was leaving DC, I had an hour-long meeting in Pentagon exactly discussing on what we can do, because day after tomorrow, Secretary Mattis would be in Pakistan to discuss exactly this. So this is a very important agenda. For the United States, it's very important, but for Pakistan, it's an essential issue, because we deal with that all the time. And therefore, we are very, very, hopeful that Pakistan and the United States should work together, will work together to bring about this change in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, this situation is not that promising. The Senior Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, SIGAR as it's called, it is an American institution, which publishes every quarter a report on what's happening in Afghanistan. So the last report that it published about 3 weeks ago, it says that 43% of the territory in Afghanistan is not under the government control or in the control of the militaries. 43%. Huge country. What does it mean? It means nearly half of that big country is now an ungoverned space, which can attract militants of the world and replay what happened before 9/11. Remember? Which was the real reason and the only reason for which the United States went there in the first place. Not to allow ungoverned spaces in Afghanistan, which should be used by these militants. It's a matter of great concern for us in Pakistan, because it has already started attracting militants of the world, biggest of all Daesh and ISIS, which had taken roots in 3 provinces bordering Pakistan, and now I understand they have now infiltrated into 3 more provinces neighboring Tajikistan in the north. And they're ferocious, they're barbaric, they're awful. Luckily, they don't have any space in Pakistan, because in Pakistan we had that national consensus against terrorism of any kind. Therefore, despite their attempt, they could not take roots. But we are having these conversations with the United States, who believes in the Trump administration believes that Afghanistan, US has not been able to succeed in Afghanistan because they think that Pakistan is providing safe havens to Taliban and the Haqqanis. And we are telling them that this is a very dated information. You guys need to update and come back and see what has happened in Pakistan. The Taliban and the Haqqanis do not represent the worldview of Pakistan people. And we don't want them in our country. We are pushing them away. But what happened in the process was that bulk of them have actually moved into those ungoverned spaces. And they are carrying out all those nefarious activities. So I think the time and the urgency requires that both Pakistan and the United States, but not only these two countries, but all other countries of the region, see what's cooking there and cooperate to eliminate that threat, which is far from over. Economic side, Pakistan is doing well. We had the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. How did that project come about? I think it's important for many people have misgivings sometimes in the United States as to what's going on there. So therefore, I think it's important for me to spend a few minutes on that. In 2013, when the present government took over in Pakistan, it had economic priorities on top of its agenda. Around the same time, President Xi took over in China. And he changed the orientation of China from an export-led heated economy to a mobilization of the domestic consumer market, which required that Western China, which was lesser developed than Eastern China, should be focused upon. But the problem with that was, and bulk of the Chinese exports, as you know, are from the eastern coast, eastern ports. So the problem was that if they develop Western China, it travels, any import or export or whatever, travels 5,000 kilometers to the east, then another 8,000 kilometers through the Malacca Strait into the Indian Ocean, and then come to the Red Sea in order to go to Mediterranean. Long, winded distance. There was also an added problem that insurance costs were going up because of trouble in East China Sea. So this project was evolved that if Western China could be connected to Pakistani port, it is only 2,000 kilometers, about 1,400 miles of distance, much shorter than 13,000 kilometers. And it made sense. The only problem was mountains, huge Himalayas and Hindu Kush mountains. How do you cross them? And that has happened. The road has been built, it's already, so this whole corridor was not only about roads, but also all forms of connectivity. Essentially to develop Western China, but in the process to develop the western part of Pakistan, which was also underdeveloped. The western part and Baluchistan. And therefore, this project started taking shape. And by next year, we are hoping that bulk of the investments which have happened in infrastructure and in energy would be completed. And we will move on to establishing special economic zones all along that corridor, where we want that there should be investments from America, Europe, and elsewhere. Because we do recognize that while we have good relations with China, there is no doubt about it, it has been a consistently good relations. We want an equally good relation with the United States. Because the United States has been a friend of Pakistan for 70 years. We cannot afford that the United States and Pakistan drift apart. Even if we differ at the moment on Afghanistan, I think it's the same area where we will have maximum convergence because of the reasons that I cited. So therefore, it is extremely important for us that United States and Pakistan and China is not a zero-sum relationship. We want equally strong ties with both countries. We were a bridge for the United States to China 40 years ago, and we think that we remain that bridge even today. And I'm very happy to share with you that corporate America is already positioning itself in Pakistan in a big way. A large number of big icons are already there or have gone there and are positioning themselves to participate in that economic activity, which is good for us, good for them. Third area, the population census of Pakistan, which was conducted about a few months ago, shows that it's now 207 million people. It's a very large population, 70% of whom, or maybe 67% of whom, are below the age of 30. It's a very, very young population. At a time when Europe is suffering from aging problems, even China, young populations are a big advantage. But a word of caution here, they can be a big advantage if they are handled well, and they can be a big liability if they are not. Fourth area is the democratic processes in Pakistan. Unfortunately, we have had interruption of democratic processes in Pakistan for 4 times. But since 2008, it has been a continuous process. It is noisy, as we are discovering. But I think in the process, it is throwing up many of the areas with which nation is now beginning to learn and improve and mature. The values of accountability, values of transparency, and many others are now coming up with it. What are the challenges that my society still faces? These are the plus areas. The challenges of religious extremism still prevail, and we need to figure out a way, because Pakistan wants to move in the direction of democracy, freedom, liberty, the values that your country and in fact your founding fathers gave you. The values which made America what it is today. The values that endear my people to your people. So I think that's the challenge that we are trying to work out. Another challenge we have is, unfortunately, not good relations with India. India is a big neighbor of Pakistan, and the two countries were carved out of one country. And therefore there is so many linkages. But unfortunately, the peace processes have not lasted there. And it's a saga of missed opportunities. But I am very convinced that the only direction that it can take and should take is for peaceful coexistence. And both countries will need to figure out a way to do that. So I think I'd like to pause here by summing up what my thesis were, and then we'll open the question and answer so that we can benefit more from that. The world is changing, it's through a flux, it's uncertain times. Our region remains mired in instability as well. And Pakistan is trying to create and turn these liabilities into opportunities to the best of abilities. But for us, this relationship with the United States remains pivotal. We believe that the two countries work together, gain a lot, and should stay friends for the common good of the people of the two countries. Thank you very much. I think I'll use that. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, the ambassador is more than happy to take some questions here. So anybody want to start us off? You laid a lot of issues on the table here.
Yeah.
You haven't.
The whole world is before you now.
You haven't lost your knack as a scholar of international relations.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being here. A lot of great information, but we need to address the big elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about our people and your people, which is Pakistani people and American people. And we've been friends for a long time, as you said.
That.
Does our president think so?
Beg your pardon?
Does our president, American president, think so? Does he know? And what are we doing to inform him that we are his friends, not his enemies?
Thank you. I think it's a good question. Normally, I do not comment as a diplomat. When I came to join this assignment in March, and I met the foreign correspondents, US correspondents, and many of them asked me what I thought about President Trump. I refused to give that answer. They asked me whether you would deal with them. I said, yes, we will. Because as a diplomat, we honor and respect the choice of the people of the United States. And that's what we do. So I'll, upfront say that I will not make a comment, but I do have the right to comment on the policies. Because the policies that affect me or my country is something that I should pronounce on. The relationship between Pakistan and the United States has been a relationship which has seen ups and downs. Although I believe the ups have been long and sustained, and downs have been short and bitter. But we have always shown that it has come back. In the 60s, we were up, 70s down, 80s up, 90s down, 2000s up, and 2010s down. And by that graph, because you are all engineers and scientists, 2020 should go back up. But the point that I'm making is that it's a very important relationship. Yes, we have differences at this time on how we can stabilize Afghanistan. US has its own approach, we have our own approach. We think that a purely military approach in Afghanistan is not going to solve problems. We think that when the NATO forces and the US forces were at its peak for a sufficiently long period of time, 144,000 troops, the solution could not be attained. How would it come by with 15,000, 16,000 troops? We think that a comprehensive approach is required. We think that the problem of Afghanistan is not just a military problem. There are issues of governance, issues of corruption, issues of drug trade. Drug trade is actually booming and financing much of this activity. Only in last 1 year, 43% increase has happened. And since 9/11, 3,700 times it has increased. Who is benefiting from that trade? So the whole war economy has actually survived and thrived on that. So these are the conversations we are having with the Trump administration. We believe that the policy that President Trump announced on August 21 relies too heavily on militaristic approach. And we are trying to put into, and we are glad that now the State Department and Secretary Tillerson brought in the political component, which is good. Because we need to learn from each other's experience and we need to work together. And that's what we want to do. And we do hope that it will be seen by the Trump administration that Pakistan remains a partner and not a target. That situation in Afghanistan will pass. This relationship is far too important that you need to maintain that trajectory of broad-based relationship. You can't throw baby with the bathwater. This relationship is far too important for my people, and I believe for the United States as well. So that's the message we are trying to give across to the US administration. So bulk of my time is actually spent in White House and some time in other interior quarters in state and elsewhere to convey that message. That we work together, we can be together, we need to work together, because I believe the objective of both Pakistan and Afghanistan and the United States is the same, to stabilize Afghanistan. If objective is the same, methodology is different, I think we need to work together on that. Sir?
Of course, Pakistan and India are both nuclear powers, and it's been said, I don't know what extent it's true, that those two countries have come close to the brink of nuclear exchanges on some occasions. And I'm just wondering what institutions and conventions and bilateral arrangements for communications have been made between those two governments to avoid catastrophe in the future?
It's a very important question. I want to tell you that Pakistan regards itself as a responsible nuclear state, and a great deal of focus has been made on that. We do not believe in nuclear bravado. We don't think that this is a weapon that should ever be used. Nuclear weapons are not for use. They're only for deterrence purposes. The only rationale for Pakistan's nuclear program is to deter aggression from our east. Beyond that, we have absolutely no intention that it should be. I, with due respect, would differ that Pakistan and India came close to nuclear exchanges many times. No, sir, we didn't. We didn't. We have conflicted, we have gone into war, but never did we ever flash our nuclear capabilities to each other. On the contrary, in 1999, when Prime Minister Vajpayee came to Lahore and they signed an agreement, nuclear confidence building measures, a nuclear CBM expert group was formed, which has met 7 times. The last meeting being in August of 2012, which I led in my capacity then as head of the Multilateral and Disarmament Affairs Division. So I know that all the measures that were envisaged in the 1999 MOU have been implemented. We inform each other, and in fact, we every 6 months, was it 6 months or 1 year? I think it's every January, 1st January, we exchange lists of nuclear installations and facilities. We notify each other about the launch of any missile test, lest the other party, misunderstands it, and so on and so forth. In fact, before the dialogue got disrupted, there were still a number of ideas on the table which we were considering and discussing to do exactly that. Pakistan has particularly focused in the last 2 decades on 4 aspects of our nuclear program. And that's why we feel more confident about it now. One is nuclear safety. We have over 40 years of experience in generating power using nuclear energy. 40 years. All our nuclear power generation plants are under the safeguards of the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. Safeguards that it has formed. And touch wood, not a single accident of any magnitude in 40 years. Nuclear security. We have now built a multi-layered system to secure fissile material as well as the weapons. For us, this is an existential matter. It is the ultimate guarantee that we have against aggression. And therefore, a lot of time has been spent, and we worked very closely with the US government, successive governments, including President Obama, because who, as you know, launched a series of nuclear security summits, culminating last year summit in White House, and I was privileged to represent my country there, and I was there in my previous capacity. And I think we learned a lot, we benefited a lot, and we worked together. And we think that our weapons and our fissile material are secure. If you go to the website of IAEA, you would discover that there are 2,765 reported incidents of the theft of fissile material. Not one of them Pakistan. It's an open channel, see the website. Most of them were in Central Asia and in Eastern Europe when Soviet Union was dismantled. Export controls. We are very, very conscious that all our export controls are in line with the multilateral export control regimes, including Nuclear Suppliers Group, Australia Group, MTCR. We are now moving into Webinar also, but these three shortly. Webinar in any case is for the conventional weapons. And we have unilaterally, although we are not a member of Nuclear Suppliers Group, but we have unilaterally declared our adherence to the guidelines of the NSG. Unilaterally. We are not a signatory to CTBT, but we have proposed a regional arrangement that if India signs CTBT, we will. So, fourth area, command and control. It is extremely important that these weapons, their authority to use them is not delegated ever. They must command and control must remain centralized. We have a national command authority headed by the Prime Minister, and we just don't want any delegation of power to go down. Sometimes in our exchanges with the United States, there is a fear expressed that perhaps Pakistan will be going to what is called, short range or low yield nuclear weapons, which could be used, say, in battlefields, like zero landmines, and we have said very clearly that the shortest range that we have is Nasr, which is about 60 kilometers. And that also was developed because India had developed what is called cold start. And therefore we had to, because our deterrence was being broken, we had to come up with it. But we are very, very conscious of this immense responsibility on us, that under no circumstances ever these two countries should even consider in their own minds or even in their imaginations a nuclear conflagration. That would be disaster. Nuclear weapons are not meant for brandishing. They are only meant for deterrence, and we are quite convinced about it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Master, for gracing us with your presence. The narrative you mentioned was that after 9/11, when Tora was formed, these militants, the so-called jihadis, they moved across the border into Pakistan. Why Pakistan became a target for them was because they joined the coalition on the international war on terror that was led by the US. Do you think this was at that point in time a strategic mistake by Pakistan to join a war that was supposed to be fought in the Afghanistan soil, but we brought it to the Pakistani soil? And you think there was an alternative policy that we could have taken that we resist the US pressure and the international pressure at the time, and at the same time we could not have directly joined the war?
They say hindsight is 20/20. There are a number of options that must have come up on the table. I'll take you even further back 2 decades, when Soviet Union decided to invade Afghanistan in December of 1979. There were opinions in Pakistan that we should not get involved. But the ultimate opinion that prevailed was to partner with the United States in fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. I have to trust the policymakers and their decision-making process. Whoever was at the helm of affairs, they thought that this was the best. Even the United States did not know that what they were starting would end up with 9/11. And it would be the same people who would actually grow up to become monsters. And when 9/11 happened, once again we were at the crossroads. But people at that time in the helm of affairs thought that we should be part of the international coalition. We should stand with the international community. Yes, there was a view that why should we get involved? But you couldn't ignore 9/11. Thousands had died. The only superpower of the world had been violated. Their territorial integrity, their sovereignty, their humanity. And therefore, it's not that Pakistan cannot choose sides at that time. I think in my humble opinion. The wisdom, collective wisdom at that time was to join this. You can say, as many people say, that it brought untold horror to Pakistan itself, because the war, it brought war from Afghanistan to Pakistan. You can say that. But I believe that this was a war that we had to fight. And I'm very happy today that we are winning that war. And we are winning this war in a time and a region when the world is still grappling with it. And we are doing it. Our nation had to go through it, and I think we'll come out stronger. Let's live it.
Thank you so much for being here. So, kind of carrying on to that question, what is your viewpoint on the conflict with India, especially with territorial conflict, especially in regions like Kashmir? So, what is your viewpoint on the future of conflict?
Well, unfortunately, when partition happened, the Kashmir question could not be resolved. And it still remains hanging in there. And with passage of time, it has become very complex. Many other factors have come into it. There is a whole lot of militant viewpoint in Pakistan who believe that the people of Kashmir are waging a rightful struggle for gaining their self-determination. The people of Pakistan and people of Kashmir have been together for centuries. If you see the geography, all rivers from Kashmir flow towards Pakistan. All roads used to lead from Kashmir towards Pakistan. All the marketplaces for the products of Kashmir were in Pakistan. And therefore the people of Pakistan, especially in northern Pakistan, and people of Kashmir have been bound together by centuries of coexistence. And therefore there is a natural urge within the people of Pakistan to support the right of the Kashmiris. And no government in Pakistan can ignore that historical fact. But beyond that, we also believe, the government of Pakistan believes, that we should support the Kashmiris, but only politically, diplomatically, and morally. And not by providing any support to the militants there. It should remain an indigenous struggle, which is the birthright of the people of Kashmir. But unfortunately, Indian government, from my perspective, have also not been very wise. They have used excessive force, deploying 700,000 troops in that valley. And they thought that the first generation of Kashmiris, once they are gone, the movement will die. It didn't die. New youngsters have also owned up the struggle. So therefore, there are many opinions within India which are saying that finding a military solution in Kashmir is not a good idea. But that's for their approach. But from Pakistan's point of view, I think the sooner this issue is resolved, the better it would be for the broader peace in South Asia. I think if this issue can be taken away, in my view, there'll be, enormous number of ways by which Pakistan and India will begin to find their peace. It is a view. There are some who don't agree with me, who say no. If this issue doesn't, gets resolved, something else will come. I'm not. I'm an optimist. I believe at the end of the day, Pakistan, people of Pakistan, I've seen that, and I was just explaining to them when I was actually dealing with the peace process before 2008, and I, traveled extensively in India, and we were dealing with. I'm sure that the ultimate direction has to be that of peace, peaceful coexistence, and good neighborly relations. I think that's the only direction, and for that dialogue must happen. In my view, it is a mistake by the government of India to suspend the dialogue. By suspending the dialogue, we play right into the hands of the terrorists and militants. In fact, every time Pakistan and India get together, the militants rise and do something nasty. And then India suspends the dialogue. And I've told my Indian counterparts, in my previous capacity, I I've dealt with this extensively. And I would say that don't do this. They are your enemies, they are our enemies, let's get together and isolate them and keep talking. But somehow we have failed to convince the Indian government of the utility of a continuous, uninterrupted, sustained dialogue.
Thank you.
Yes, lady? Okay.
Thank you for being here. I have a question about your perspective on the recent protests which erupted in Pakistan surrounding the clerical error about the finality of the prophethood. The government and the public alike seem to share the sentiment that this error is intolerable because it could have given more rights to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. So my question is, do you think that this issue and past persecution of the Ahmadiyya community and other religious minorities like Christians in Pakistan, do you think this lowers responsibility to negotiate on an international stage in nations like the U.S. where freedom of religion is so paramount?
Certainly. This issue is a very important issue, a very sensitive issue in Pakistan. And it has been so. Unfortunately, by some reason, either typographical error or some reason, it got altered. And the new election bill that was election reforms bill became incongruent with the constitutional provisions on this issue. And that gave opportunity to certain religious extremist outfits to start making a big issue out of this. Blasphemy law in Pakistan is not the only exception when it comes to blasphemy laws worldwide. Every country has had blasphemy laws. Blasphemy laws basically says that the personalities that you revere, you do not insult them. You must respect them. But it's the misuse of blasphemy law which has resulted in a lot of problem in Pakistan. And contrary to the opinion that prevails, vast majority of the victims of blasphemy law are Muslims, 85%. Not Christians, not Hindus, not anybody else. And mainly because some political religious outfits try to settle score with another person for some reason, claiming that he has disrespected the Prophet. So therefore, I think it is now becoming increasingly clear that we have to work harder in finding ways to stop the misuse of blasphemy law. You know, one of the governors of one of the provinces in Pakistan was shot by his own guard, who thought that the governor had actually carried out disrespect of the Prophet, Holy Prophet. And therefore, it's that kind of sensitive issue which became the reason for this unrest. But it's not happened first time. It happened in 1953, it happened in 1973, but every time the consciousness and awareness have built and people are ready to see that it's better not to touch this issue and go on with our lives. Yes, ma'am.
So most of us at Georgia Tech are on an esteemed scholarship, and in the recent government there has been a tax, like a budget cut for esteemed scholars of about 50%. And since we consider ourselves as advocates for the USA in promoting its good image back in Pakistan, and similarly bringing back a good Pakistani image in the USA. So do you think you guys, probably the government is going to look into it, the cut that has been made to the scholarship that has mostly affected us, that has actually reduced our number to half?
This, as you know, is part of a much bigger discussion point in the United States. President Trump's administration has chosen to cut the budget for State Department by 29%, and many of the development budget has also been cut. It hasn't been adopted yet. I know that the US Senate and House would be discussing whether it is advisable to shrink the State Department and all its development budget by that big percentage or not. But it's for the US to take its own decision. But I do agree with you that some of these exchange programs have not only been beneficial for developing countries like Pakistan, but they have also been beneficial for the United States itself. So you see, United States is a global power, and its global presence requires suscitation. Sending that message, sending its friends. It needs more friends in the world. It's easy to make enemies, but it's difficult to find friends. And therefore, these programs have been the biggest source of earning friendships for Pakistan, for the United States, and ultimately partnerships, business or other partnerships for the United States. I hope that some of these programs can continue. And I also hope that the recipient governments would also chip in to continue with their own funds such programs, because they are beneficial for us also. It's not the responsibility only of the United States to do that. I think it's a shared responsibility, and we should do it ourselves as well. I said to our people that I'm a pro-woman person, and I've proven that. 3 women questions, but 2 men. But I still ban, because I also believe in gender balance. So yes, sir. I think that gentleman raised the comment.
Just commenting on the point which you have made earlier, that the world, I think, is facing a quite serious terrorism, right? Both the Middle East, what you see today, is unstable. And as you said, that since the drug trade has benefited in Afghanistan a lot, and the number you have given us again, almost similar trends have been observed in the Middle East when the terrorists have benefited from the oil exports. We saw them carrying flags in the latest vehicles, having most of modern weaponry. And with the 57% or I think 53% of Pakistan uncontrollable but not under any government supervision, and this drug trade increased, how would we try to, or how would Pakistan, United States, and the world community as a whole would stop this thing? Because we have seen in Pakistan during these recent operations of Rebel Bazaar and others that if you cut the money trail of these terrorists or these organizations, we benefit a lot.
Thank you. I think it's a very, very important area, perhaps root of the problem. Financing. Financing of terrorism has now gained central place in the counter-terrorism campaigns all across, including my country. We have had that problem for a long time because a large informal economy that exists, it's difficult to track the bad money which is going on and financing such nefarious activities. But there is a process within the country. We have adopted a number of laws to stop that. And I understand at the international level, under UN Security Council's directive, a financial action task force called FATF has been working, where all countries are getting together to find ways of blocking these channels of finances that are going to the terrorists. And I do hope that that all governments would succeed in that. It's not going to be an easy task, but we need to do that. And we need to do that, and I can't agree more with you that unless you cut off the finances, we cannot actually stop their activities. In Afghanistan, the drug trade is financing the entire war economy. And these beneficiaries of that drug trade have actually become very powerful in this scheme, and they are not interested in peace anymore because they benefit directly from that. So it's a very serious issue. One more, okay, we'll take last question. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry, you have been raising hand for a long time. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We are really honored to have you here. My question is regarding the current situation prevailing in the Middle East, where the United States is supporting Saudi Arabia in the war against Yemen, and then there is a rising confrontation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Keeping in mind that Iran is our neighbor in the West, where Pakistan is standing and what will be the long-term implications of our stand?
Yeah, thank you. It's an important question. Saudi Arabia is a very close friend of Pakistan. It's home to the two holiest shrines for Muslims. It is revered. 2 million Pakistanis work there, perhaps more. And therefore, we have a very good relations with Saudi Arabia. Iran is a neighbor. Iran is a neighbor, and Persian language had deep imprint on the culture in Pakistan, as indeed in the entire Indian subcontinent. And therefore, we want equally good relation with Iran. So we were caught between the two. And in March of 2015, when Saudi government somehow decided to launch military strikes on Yemen, things came to a head. And the debate that ensued in Pakistan was that we will not take sides. We cannot afford to take sides. Why? One, because both countries are friends of Pakistan. Two, because we have a mixed population, Shia and Sunni. And if we begin to take sides, there will be unrest within the country itself as well. So therefore, it made perfect sense for Pakistan not to choose sides. But it's easier said than done, because the friends expect that you will stand with us, no matter what. Third, we felt that this whole business of making regime changes in other countries by external force is a bad idea. And that is why Pakistan has not taken any partisan position in the conflict in Syria or Libya or Yemen or anywhere else. This whole concept of R2P, are you familiar with that? R2P. R2P was a concept that emerged in the early part of the century called responsibility to protect, which basically meant that if a particular regime is not treating its people well, then it is the responsibility of the international community to set aside that regime, or at least help those people. This was born out of the Rwandan crisis. You remember Rwandan crisis? 1994. 8,000 people killed per day for 100 days. 800,000 people killed with knives, and the international community watched. That's why this concept came up. But having gone up, we always felt that this could be misused. I don't like this regime. I will change it by use of force. We don't like it. We think that the principles on which United Nations was founded, and by the way, this country was the most instrumental in founding United Nations, were based on the respect for the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-intervention, and non-interference. They remain valid if you want to preserve the world peace. We have received the world peace for 7-8 decades because of those principles, and the moment we violated them, we saw the result, what happened in Libya and Iraq and Syria and so on. Therefore, Pakistan believes, and therefore we refuse to join any move which would make us intervene in any third country. And that's the position we have taken, and we are cautioning both countries that they need to resolve these issues peacefully. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ambassador. You gave us a lot of food for thought, but I think the best benchmark of success is standing room only on a Friday at 5 o'clock on our university campus. So I thank you very much, and please join me again in thanking the ambassador.
Let me present you a book for your office. This is about the churches of Pakistan, right? Until I saw this book myself, I didn't know that we had such a rich cultural heritage of Christianity. There are thousands of churches, studied beautiful ones, in all over Pakistan. So I hope that you'll enjoy and seeing them and keeping them in your
I look forward to visiting them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. God bless you all. God bless you all. God bless America. God bless all. Thank you, sir.